Welcome back, artists. In this video, I'm going to do a line and wash pet portrait of Gracie Mae. Gracie Mae is the dog that my friend and coworker owned, and unfortunately, recently, Gracie Mae passed away. So I'm going to do a pet portrait of Gracie Mae for my friend. This is based on the reference photograph that Sami sent me. I'm just going to do the head here. I'm going to keep with the same light source, which is from the upper left. I'm left-handed, so traditionally for left-handers, unless you put the source of light in the photograph or in the painting itself, you would by default have it off the page at 10 o'clock. If I were a right-hander, it would be off the page at 2 o'clock. But all I did was use this as a guide. I used my regular number 2 pencil, nothing special about that. Sketched out the initial drawing, and then I went over the top of that with a pen. In this case, it's an Itoya blade pen. Right there, so that you can see it, Itoya blade. I really like this pen. It is water soluble, at least partially, but I find I really just like it. I just like the way it feels. And so here's the initial sketch and then pen work that I've done over the top of the sketch, and then I erase the pencil lines underneath. I'm going to start with my watercolor graphite, which is what I often like to do, as it helps me establish the values for my painting, which I find particularly helpful. In a traditional watercolor, you paint from lights to dark, but I found that adding this intermediate step is very helpful in helping me control my values and make my painting look more realistic. What I do is I get all the dark areas of my painting, and then the midtones as well. By omission, I leave the light areas. And then over the top of this, I will just go with my paints, with my watercolors. I do want to be careful around the eyes in particular, because this is where we carry expression. And now, in keeping with the source of light being off the page at 10 o'clock, I'm going to be mindful of where my shadows are. Now, she has a bit of a white stripe on the top of her nose. There's the recess area for the eye. Part of what I love about this watercolor graphite that I use is that it can got all these gradations of gray, much like a photographer would. I use it in the same manner. And this lets me just concentrate on really thinking black and white and thinking in terms of values, relative lights and darks, keeping in mind where my source of light is off the page at 10 o'clock. I want to be sure to catch this area on her throat here, right under her chin. And then along her neck here. She has some white markings on her chest here. I'm going to try to capture correctly. All right, there we go. There's our basic underpainting done in watercolor graphite. Now this painting is set up such that it's just ready for a vignette style painting, and I think that's what I'll do. As I've been painting along here, I think that that's a good way to present this. A vignette is just a type of, it's a French term. It just means a short, simple statement of your piece. You're just getting down to the basic elements. I like to go diagonally from one corner to the opposite corner. In this case, since Gracie Mae is down here in the lower left, I'll anchor it up off to the upper right, and then put in just some light little fillers in the two opposite corners. It's a classic type of painting. It's been around for well over 100 years. The Impressionist painters started that style of painting. All right, so there we go. So now I'll start, now that I've established my lights and darks, I have basically a black and white painting at this point. Now I'll start in with my lightest colors and work in a traditional watercolor fashion from lights to darks. keeping in mind, again, the source of my light. Now, Gracie Mae is a dark-colored dog, but we'll put some highlights on her here. Now, I paint in a relatively loose style here, and I like that because it lets the eye complete the object. I will try to capture where all the highlights would be, and of course she's got the white on her nose. Now, very often, in addition to this cerulean blue that I have, I'll use cobalt blue. I love that color combination. Those two are like salt and pepper. It just really goes well together. Okay, now Gracie is actually a dark-colored dog. Now this is where the fun begins. This is where so much of painting with watercolor is letting watercolor do its thing, letting the paints do their thing. And you sort of guide the paint along with where you want it to be. And in this case, now by virtue of the fact that I have underpaintings on here, that's going to color and tint the colors of these later colors that I put on, like this quinacridone burnt orange. Now if I do something like that where I get a little bit odd, that doesn't bother me. I'm paying attention and just where I want to. And whenever that happens to you, like right here, just lift it off like I did quickly, and now let it dry, and then you can come back in and adjust it later if you need to. Now I'm going to put in some, this is Prussian blue. But I need to step down these shadow areas, and then in vignette fashion, come off the page here a little bit. This is her white chest area. Now, whenever you put in eyes, like, you want to leave what's called a lamp light, so that the animal or the human being or whatever the living object is that you're painting looks alive. So you can see by the pupil, I've left part of it intentionally white. Touch it with a little bit of blue. All right, well, there she basically is. Let's add in some background here to help give her a little context. Now, when you paint in a fast and loose manner like I do, sometimes you'll intentionally paint outside the lines. So now notice I've got a little bit of movement there that I really don't want, especially there in my eye. But when I'm putting in the background like this, we can salvage that area. But I'm also going to put in a little bit of background elsewhere around the piece. And the key to it is just make sure I get my values adjusted on my main object relative to the background. All right, now my paper is buckling quite badly on me, which is what it always does. That's a matter of relative wetness. This surface of the paper is wetter and expands, whereas the opposite side of the paper is drier and doesn't expand. So it buckles. The only thing to do is let it dry, and it'll go back to shape there. I can bend it a little bit. Now my eye. For these type of issues, I do have some white gouache, but that's wet, so I've got to let that dry because I want the paint to go in one spot and only one spot. I don't want it to diffuse. So I'll have to let it dry. Okay. Putting my finger against that eye of Gracie's, it is dry. Instead of using white gouache, I'm going to use white acrylic paint. It's heavier bodied and should stay on top of the other paint more successfully than the gouache would. The gouache would tend to blend with it, which is what I do not want it to do. Little goes a long way. I just need a dab of it there. All right, there we go. There's Gracie Mae. We started with the initial sketch and line drawing. Then we went over it with our watercolor graphite to establish our values. And then finally we went over it with our watercolors. And at the very end, to recover the lamplight in Gracie's left eye, we used some white acrylic paint. I like that. And I think Sami will too. Well, I'll let it hard dry overnight, and then I'll sign it, and we'll send it off to Sami. All right. Thank you so much for following along, everyone. I really appreciate you. Please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.